Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, power-hungry president sucks the joy out of a local artist collective, ends up having to leave town. Truck drivers who won't turn off their engine. I can't hear you. Try to take away job. Quit in glory. Before we get into today's episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss a video. So let's get started. Power-hungry president sucks the joy out of a local artist collective, ends up having to leave town. Posting from a throwaway. I heard all this secondhand as it was happening, so I'll try to be as faithful to the actual events as possible, with the caveat that I wasn't there. A warning and an apology, this is long. For background, my older sister, who I'll call Beth, is married to her high school sweetheart, who I'll call Craig. Beth is a pretty laid-back person, but she has one hot-button trigger that causes her to have zero chill: anyone treating her beloved Craig poorly. Craig is very quiet and kind, just in general a mild-mannered, good-natured guy who's not great at standing up for himself, so he often attracts bad actors who view him as an easy mark, and because he always assumes that other people have good intentions, he's not great at realizing when he's being mistreated. Beth is usually pretty relaxed about things, but she will basically turn into a howling, vengeance-seeking banshee if anyone takes advantage of Craig. Which brings us to approximately 2 to 3 years ago. Craig works a white-collar job remotely, but he's an amateur artist craftsman as a hobby. He does wood carving, a little bit of light metalwork, and 2D art, mainly pencil sketches and pen and ink illustrations. He joined an artists' collective makerspace where he could work on these hobbies around like-minded people, and he absolutely loved it. Whenever I hung out with him and Beth around this time, Craig would excitedly talk about the space and his projects there with infectious enthusiasm. His eyes were practically beaming out of his head whenever it came up. Beth joined too to improve on her own hobby of fiber arts, mainly weaving and dyeing, but she was way less into it than Craig. Some time after this, the president of the makerspace stepped down. It was essentially a volunteer position, though it came with a small, mostly symbolic, stipend. Since the makerspace had no actual staff, being president of the makerspace was a huge undertaking that involved being a one-man show for everything for a start, coordinating with the board, keeping day-to-day operations going, and chasing the grants that kept the lights on. The current president just couldn't do it anymore with his full-time job, and announced his intention to vacate the role. Craig had come to love the makerspace, and he figured he had the resources to be an effective president. His job is entirely remote and deliverables-based, he can work whatever hours he wants as long as he's meeting his objectives, so he figured he could work out of the makerspace on his laptop and be available there if anyone needed him, and then do the heavy lifting of the role outside work hours. So he threw his hat in the ring. Enter Jamie, a recent industrial design grad. Jamie was known to be flaky and very dramatic, but he'd been a member of the makerspace for a couple of years, almost as long as it had existed, and he felt entitled to be handed the presidency because he had seniority. He lost his damn mind when he heard that Craig had the audacity to go for the same role and complained to several members about how Craig was massively overstepping. This got back to Craig, who didn't really take it seriously, and it also got back to Beth, who, of course, was already irritated that Jamie was shit-stirring, but kept it to herself. Long story short, Jamie won the member vote by a small margin, which Craig was very gracious about. Craig congratulated Jamie on the victory, then settled back into business as usual. Jamie was not so gracious. He was enraged that Craig had gotten so many votes, and made it known to everyone that he was trying to figure out who had voted for Craig, and that they would pay. Many of the members who had voted for Jamie passively because he'd been around forever and they didn't really know Craig were shocked by this behavior and started privately expressing regret to each other. But it gets worse. The makerspace had always offered members the perk of sponsoring workshops, meetups, and classes that anyone, members or non-members, could attend. All you had to do was sign up for the space on a first-come, first-served basis and kick up 20% of any profits to the makerspace if you charged a fee. Jamie started preemptively canceling classes and workshops sponsored by anyone on his shit list by blocking off all available reservations during the regular times certain classes would be held. So Craig had traditionally sponsored a popular casting workshop on Wednesday evenings, and suddenly all Wednesday evenings were booked solid before the sign-up sheet was even available. He tried switching to Thursday, but after just one rescheduled workshop, suddenly Thursday evenings were out too. He tried Tuesdays, but because it was so early in the week, no one could come. Craig was bummed, but was still too good-natured to realize Jamie was intentionally sabotaging him out of spite, despite a righteously angry Beth trying to paint the picture for him of what was going on. Beth was pissed. But she wasn't banshee pissed yet. Not until Jamie selectively told the people on his shit list that member fees were going up by almost double. He presented this as a makerspace-wide policy, but he made one crucial error. Somehow, Jamie never picked up on Craig and Beth being married, probably because he was never around both of them at the same time. So Beth flew under his radar, and he didn't raise her member fees, just Craig's and some of Craig's known friends, which confirmed to her that he was intentionally retaliating against Craig. At this point, Beth had steam coming out of her ears and went to go talk to the board, since they have the power to cite or even throw out the president. They were uneasy about what she told them, but they said the president was technically allowed to set member fees, and they'd keep an eye on things. Beth didn't really believe the board that they'd be keeping an eye on things, because Jamie was already dropping the ball all over the place, and the board wasn't making a peep over it. He wanted to be president because of the prestige, but he was never willing to do the work, so he just didn't do it, and things were falling apart. The makerspace was getting late notices on unpaid bills, basic maintenance of the space wasn't getting done, materials weren't being restocked as they ran out, and the record keeping was non-existent. It got so bad that the previous president, who had stepped down because he couldn't handle the time commitment anymore, who had run the makerspace from its inception, quit as a member altogether because he was so saddened and disgusted by how bad things had gotten. He'd put his blood, sweat, and tears into this place, and stepped down from a role he treasured because he believed it was in the best interest of the organization, and now he had to watch Jamie run this place he loved into the ground out of sheer laziness. Craig was also losing his excitement over the makerspace, because he no longer had the space or resources to do the things he enjoyed there. Beth, at this point, had gone from furiously angry to strategically angry. Suspecting that Jamie was being shady in more ways than one, she spent a few days being friendly to Jamie and sucking up to him, and then sprung on him the offer to help with the organization's bookkeeping and records. Still not realizing that she was Craig's wife, but knowing that she worked as a project manager in her day job, Jamie saw a chance to get some skilled work done at zero effort to himself, and he happily agreed, and gave her access to the makerspace's Google Sheets, not the most high-tech operation. For a little while, Beth bided her time, bringing the financial accounts up to date and continuing to be diabolically friendly to Jamie. After a while of this, she calmly pulled together 6 copies of documents comparing the official organizational income that Jamie was reporting to her with the actual income, which Jamie was completely unaware she was tracking. These documents proved that Jamie was not only skimming money off the top of class and workshop fees, but was actively stealing money from the grants the makerspace was receiving, which is highly illegal. Beth gave the 6 board members her impeccably compiled proof of what was happening. Almost immediately, the board fired Jamie and issued a lifetime ban from the makerspace. They were afraid of losing their grants if news came out about the gross misappropriation, so they didn't report Jamie to the authorities, but instead gave him 48 hours to return the stolen funds, the implication being that they would report him if he didn't. He panicked and complied, selling his car quickly to do it and scrounging up the difference in a ton of quick loans from friends, many of whom were makerspace members not aware of what was going on. No, he never paid them back. He's now persona non grata with all of his former friends, and while he still has a clean criminal record, word traveled pretty far in the local artist community, which means he was blacklisted from most of the industrial design jobs in the area and couldn't use his degree if he wanted to stay in town. As far as Beth and Craig knew, he moved away about 6 months after all this went down, but they haven't kept up with him, and don't know where he is. The makerspace board realized their setup was bad, so instead of a single president, they restructured to have a panel of volunteer officers running the operation. Craig is one of them, and has happily thrown himself back into woodworking and metal casting. Beth still helps out with the books. Truck drivers who won't turn off their engine. I can't hear you. I work at a global company that ships out just about anything you can think of. Can arrive in 2 days with a monthly payment. You probably know what this is. My department works partially outdoors. I am usually outside, making sure the drivers get to their doors, drop off trailer, pick up loads, etc. Usually, the drivers are awesome. They come in with their tractor trailers, stop at the line, turn off the engine, say hello, I tell them where they need to go, give the thumbs up, send on their way. Sometimes they don't turn off the engine. Sometimes they don't stop at the stop sign, which is where I am. Stop to talk to me, turn off engine. Easy. If they don't do either of those things, I speak softly, almost whispering. I have a staring contest until they pull forward and turn it off. It makes me feel a little bit better. Try to take away job. Quit in glory. This is the story of my wife getting pro-revenge. At 7 months pregnant, we knew my wife wasn't going to return to work after maternity leave. But, she had planned on working right to the day her water broke. A few months before her due date, there was a restructuring of the organization. She actually got a promotion and a small raise. But, her new direct manager was at the corporate level, and had never treated my wife with respect in her previous role. Over the next few months, as my wife started a very major project, she kept detailed notes of everything, to make sure that there was a smooth transition when she went out on leave. At this same time, her new boss started being excessive with micromanaging. It finally got to the point that the director, we'll call Patrice because god damn it Patrice, started slowly pulling responsibilities away from my wife. To us, it looked like she was trying to position my wife's role to be eliminated when she was on leave. By law, they only had to have a comparable role when she came back, not the exact same position. It finally reached a head when Patrice called my wife into HR to formally reprimand her. Allegations included bad attitude, unprofessional conduct, and outright lying to coworkers. After talking it over, my wife and I decided to say, fuck them, and she gave her 1 week notice the next day. Shit hit the fan, and there was a lot of questions, especially from coworkers, and management above Patrice. My wife just said that with her upcoming leave, she felt it best to exit now. Then there was the transition meeting. She called in Patrice, her coworkers, her leadership, and the vendor that was involved in the project. During that meeting, my wife went through all the project plans to date, with a very specific timeline of the project. This timeline included things like notes from previous meetings of what was stated, validation emails from Patrice, requests for meetings to which Patrice declined or simply no-showed. There was the introduction of the new processes that Patrice put into place which proved to drastically delay many checkpoints. My wife told me that after the showing the third example of late delivery due to Patrice's lack of response, or sudden need to include her friends in the project for feedback, it was apparent to everyone in the room that Patrice was the reason that everything was running behind schedule and over cost. The last slide my wife presented was the last update, the official complaints Patrice had filed with HR, with refuting evidence. My wife told me that Patrice was equally furious and embarrassed, and leadership decided to pull the project from her. My wife left her contact info, and let them know she would be available for consulting at competitive rates, finished her 1 week notice, and left. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe and we'll see you in the next video.